And so thank you all, each of you, for joining us for this important webinar. We know that we had nearly 1,000 participants signing up to join us for this. I think we are all craving community and connection and content. And I just want to start us off by just first asking, how are you all doing? And how are you adjusting? And how are your firms adjusting? Gina, can you start us off?
Sure. Well, good afternoon. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be on, and thank you for asking, Cheryl. Doing well. I mean, this is a challenging time, obviously, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unknowns ahead of us. But, overall, well, I mean, certainly, loving the use of technology and how technology has brought us together as a community at Perkins+Will, but also as a community even right here. And I think we're all learning from it and growing from that. And so hopeful, but certainly concerned about our country and the situation, but optimistic that we'll pull through this and be stronger designers as a result.
That's great. Thank you. Sue, in Los Angeles, Shimoda Design Group, different scope and size than Perkins+Will. You're a small firm with huge projects. How are you all managing? How's your team doing?
The team's coping fairly well. You're right, we are an office of 17 people with admins, 2 to 3 admin support, 2 full-time, 1 part-time. And so this did take us by surprise in terms of having to work from home. And as a small office, we're so used to being in one room together, literally on top of each other sometimes. And so I think we're, faring pretty well. I think most of the studio are, they're savvy with technology. And so working from home and doing the web based meetings, we've I think got that down. I think where we're still experimenting is how do we actually do design work together. We're so collaborative. We pass paper back and forth, share models and things like that. And so it'll be interesting moving, going into the next month or so, how we, figure out how to do some of that together apart.
Right.
So it's a challenge, but we'll see. Yeah.
Jordan, how, from a management standpoint at Gensler, I think, wasn't there a big 7,000 person conference call this week?
Yeah, we did. We had a large call last week with everyone invited on it. And, it's interesting, with the whole context being such a challenging transition to a different way of working, right? This kind of new reality that we're all in, with our colleagues in China, we saw this play out 2 months prior, and it gave us some warning signs that allowed us to migrate our projects to, to the cloud so people could work from home, to prepare from a tech standpoint. And so the perspective really changed. I think for us, we look at it like, instead of being 50 offices around the world, we're 6,700 offices around the world, and everybody's connected. And it causes us, I think, to appreciate what it means to be a borderless practice in a totally different way.
Yeah. Tara, how's life in Atlanta? How are you faring?
It's been an interesting transition. I think with Hendrick, we're about 40 plus people. We had already just recently implemented a new work from home policy. So I think it's kind of just forced us into just jumping immediately into that. So there was already some level of transition to the work from home. I had personally purchased like a beefed up laptop to be able to do those things. So I have my little setup here, but I think it's really showed us how we can work together as a team separately. We downloaded Teams from Microsoft, so we're chatting back and forth for design presentations and concept kind of development. We're using Bluebeam Studio and sharing a lot. So I think we've found ways to get around the pen to paper in-person conversation. It's still challenging, but I think we're trying to help each other through the process with different generations in the office, trying to come together and help each other through this learning curve of tech.
Yeah. From the day-to-day of life in a design firm, from access to your library, to continuing education, to meeting with clients, how have you seen those things immediately change? Any of you?
So I help to manage the library team at Hendrick, and I think the reps have been super amazingly helpful in terms of offering up online CEUs immediately, scheduling any calls with us or Zoom meetings if we want to review things, offering to ship things from home. One of the reps is doing a fun, shout out to Alan Martin, she's doing a fun care package. If you answer a daily question of where in the world the picture is from, she'll send a care package to the Atlanta design community. So I think they're really trying to push forward to help us through this process and get through it with technology.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see like what the digital toolbox looks like now. Like new tools are coming in and people like are embracing them. And my feeling is like what tools people start to embrace over the next couple of weeks will become part of the new relied upon tools going forward. So, you know, for us, for the technology side, it's been a really interesting kind of palette. You know, yes, there's Zoom, there's GoTo, there's been a huge adoption of Microsoft Teams, people using Teams Live and Skype, but also like how do you access materials and finishes when you can't get to libraries, right? So, resources like, Material Bank, being able to use, SharePoint sites to be able to, gather information. And I also find that there's the work side of it, like being able to have project continuity, which is obviously important, but then also the social continuity and people using the same tools to be able to express themselves and how they're coping with their colleagues.
Yeah.
And I would chime in with, I've found our clients have embraced communicating with us virtually. I mean, we've had many virtual presentations, which of course we had in the past as well, but those have increased naturally. And it's been a very easy transition. We've even had many interviews across the firm virtually, and that's been fun to choreograph and do well. And so I think we're all again learning and growing from the experience.
I've had one or two job site visits, with FaceTime. So it's interesting. Not the easiest way to review a job site, but certainly a tool that I think maybe the cameras can improve, but to better the quality. But I think we're all finding new ways.
Yeah. And that seems to be the order of the day, to kind of hashtag new ways. Design has always talked to clients, consumers, end users about flexibility and agility, and we're really putting that to the test. And do you all think it's going to change what your clients are asking you for? We're thinking differently about access. We're going to be thinking differently about physical space. We're going to be thinking differently about how we connect with one another. And so what do you think your clients they may already be asking you to help them think differently about the physical environment, or even on the consulting side, how we think about connection and community?
There definitely is already dialogue going on about how do we think differently about the places and spaces and the objects that are in those spaces that that we're all designing. I find it really interesting to have these conversations now when you start to think about this kind of challenge context out there. Clients asking about how do I think about my spaces as biosafe spaces? So the materials and textures and finishes that are creating a healthier environment, and then add on the whole focus on climate action, and really trying to think about should we build, and if we're building, what are we building that is actually contributing to a better world?
Right.
I think from the workplace perspective, because Hendrick designs primarily workplaces, I think a lot of them are going to be thinking heavily on technology and that incorporation and flexibility. So I've had a lot of friends who were like, oh, I have to take my monitor and CPU home because they didn't have a laptop and that was their only access to have the technology at home. So more kind of plug and play, the ability to work from home is going to become obviously a huge factor in designing offices here from now on. So I think that's one of the things that is going to come into play.
And I think there is also going to be a blending of knowledge, the knowledge that exists, for example, in healthcare in terms of infection control and materiality and so on, that will begin to inform workplace. Not that workplaces will become, like a hospital, but I think there's going to be a lot of learning that will be shared across practice areas to benefit the workforce in general.
Gina, you bring up a really good point, and in taking this beyond workplace, this idea that how we learn, how we live, how we relax has completely, every aspect of our lives has been utterly turned upside down. And in thinking about space and our access to other human beings in this context, moving forward, how do you think the places that we're accustomed to, like museums, we were talking a little bit earlier about how museums are seriously considering digitizing their collections to make those available to people, not just Monday through Sunday from 9 to 5, but whenever you want access to that collection. Libraries have already done some of that, but I'm thinking about learning. I'm thinking about an educational environment. I have a college student who is at home now, who now is going to spend the rest of his semester e-learning, and he's in an art and design program. Let's talk a little bit about the disciplines and how they're going to be affected and changed, and how your firms are going to be responding to that.
Yeah, I think this whole migration to virtual learning, and you point out the challenges of that in the design industry, where we're working with materials and models and physical tools that help us visualize and understand space. But I see the uptick, obviously, in virtual tools that will allow us to do that better. And of course, they're out there and we use them. But I think in schools, we'll begin to see more and more adaptation of that, and more online learning, which has been a tool that has existed in business schools for an awfully long time, and has been adopted in many educational programs designed perhaps behind some of those programs in virtual learning. So definitely an increase in that going forward.
I think the transition in terms of schools is going to be an interesting one. I'm the alumni mentor for the interior design program for SCAD, and I'm having to create kind of virtual presentations, whereas I would go in physically to the classes and interact with students. Having to come up with kind of hour-long sessions to replace that has caused me to rethink how we can still have that connection with students through virtual interactions. If you're lecturing and transitioning into demonstrations, how does that work when you would pick up a pen and sketch on the board versus maybe doing that virtually and having a sketch session online? So having to rethink that whole dynamic of one-on-one student contact and how you do that through technology.
Yeah. Tara, you brought up students, and the calendarization of everything has changed. Many schools don't know when they're going to be able to conduct their commencements, their graduations. I'm thinking about and wondering about the students out there who had planned on internships that may not be able to start when they thought, or the credits may be at jeopardy. How do you all think maybe firms can help support students? I know we've got some students listening in on today's presentation. What can students be doing to be prepared for kind of what's next? And are there things that you all can speak to how students are being supported?
I think students could still reach out the same way they've been reaching out for internships. One thing I think firms can do is still offer them, but have them come in the same way they're having the employees work from home or using technology to facilitate that interaction. Test that out with interns and have them not feel like we've left them behind, because there's still going to be able to come into the workforce at some point when all of this is over, but they need those internship credits. They still need our support as a design community. So having them share your online system and work on Revit models and do things that they can still do from home to help support the firms.
I think it's a really good point. I think that we've always at Gensler really benefited from having interns a part of the mix, because they're bringing in their exposure to different ways of thinking, different tools that they had in academia that just make design opportunities that much richer by virtue of expanding the exploration. And I think that can still happen virtually. You don't need to be necessarily in immediate proximity to have those kind of learning exchanges. And I was just thinking about on the prior question, I've been involved in a class. We've been teaching a virtual studio at the University of Tennessee this semester, and it's actually been really interesting because we were doing it virtually because travel was, trying to work out the travel was challenging, but now it's become a necessity.
Yeah.
It's the only way we're staying connected to the students.
Yeah.
And but it works, and it actually creates a whole level of exchange of ideas in a way that it's almost more rapid fire.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that can actually be beneficial, especially when we're talking about interns and windows of time that they're spending with studios.
Yeah. Yeah. Are we, it almost feels like we're needing to do things and respond much more quickly, living in this virtual environment. I feel like we're all on 8 Zoom calls a day. And in the midst of those Zoom calls, you've got your phone and you're texting the other people on the Zoom call, just kind of like it would happen in conference rooms too. But there's so much more, I feel, that's being thrown at us. And we also have these now very porous borders between work and life. And, how are you all coping with that? And do you have any helpful hints or tips for the folks listening in? Because it's work and life have kind of crashed into one another.
They definitely become very blurry, those lines, right?
Yeah.
It's what once was an ability to have some boundaries now feels like it's all kind of thrown in together. Just speaking personally, I think, and I see this with a lot of my colleagues at Gensler too, is just recognizing that, you could be on web calls all the time. So being able to still have some structure to that and take breaks, take pauses, go outside, and be able to, just get a little bit of a change of point of view. The other thing I found is, and I did this here, was just like rearranging the space that I'm working. So it's not just throw the computer down at the dining room table, but create a space that actually feels comfortable, and know that space can change on a daily basis. It doesn't have to be one size fits all for the duration of a work from home mode. Yeah. And then figuring out those social moments, I think, was the other piece, is still being able to kind of connect with colleagues and have as much of an interpersonal exchange as possible. Like you said, we had these webinars last week. We had one that was all 6,700 people, but then we had others throughout the week that were of different subsets of the firm, practice area leaders, design leaders, and the different sizes, but they were all great because they brought people together and allowed a dialogue to happen that wasn't just about the work. We're all staying client focused, but there's still the importance of being connected to one another.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And in some ways, I think it's been kind of fun to see people that might not speak up in a forum where you're in a large group of people have spoken up on our calls via Teams, which has been great to see. And in some ways, there's been a connectedness and almost a knitting together that I think this circumstance has drawn us closer in some regard. Mm-hmm. But in terms of the question, Cheryl, about own work style, I think getting outside is really important. I've taken some conference calls on walks, which has been really helpful, and tried to, shut down in the evening and, look at my phone even less probably than I did previously, and just, focus on the things that are most important.
Yeah, I think I'm the opposite where I'll take a call on my phone or my iPad or at the desk, and then I tend to kind of wander the room and try to use up the room because I just can't sit for such a long time. And I do, I went from maybe 4 video calls a day to now 10 or 12. And so my mind and just, constantly looking at the monitor, I just need to look away.
Yeah.
And so luckily at home, I have my dog and we just play fetch in between those calls, which is kind of nice because he's stuck inside and, usually we can walk many walks out, but they try to, keep us, they're encouraging us to limit those walks. So.
Right. Tara, you're solo in a 1-bedroom apartment, right?
I have a roommate, so that's why I'm in
Okay.
my bedroom
Oh,
right
okay.
now. But, so I kind of have a rigged setup in the living room with my sofa and a laptop table. So it's not quite the best. It worked when I had to work from home for like a day or so. And now that we're realizing that this thing will kind of extend beyond 1, 2, maybe 3, 4 weeks, we don't know. I'm kind of looking at rethinking crafting an area somewhere else that's more office-like in a way versus me lounging on the couch with my laptop. So having to really think about designated spaces. I don't have a dining room table, otherwise I would sit there. So maybe buying a table and chair that can be a desk.
Yeah.
So looking at the long-term implications of this extended stay at home.
Yeah. Tara, let me ask you, I'm going to go demographic on you for a moment. Do you think that given the entire community, the world that's facing this, I'm going to ask you to be a spokesperson for your generation. Do you think that there is a millennial attitude? And I know you hate labels, but do you think that there are some attitudes around this that are age-based, demographic-based, about how we're handling technology, how we're handling work from home, how we're handling relationships with colleagues and coworkers in a virtual environment?
I think for me and the conversations that I've been having with my friends, talking about big picture, just an upheaval of the whole process of just capitalism and just the chaos that we're seeing as a fallout we've been talking about for so long, because part of my generation, we got really hit very hard with the recession when we were first looking for jobs. There's a whole student loan talk and seeing how struggling we are right now. A lot of my friends in the service industry, they don't have that cushion that I have or like some other people have or the older generation has. So they're really struggling. So the conversations that I've been seeing is more about the change that's going to come after this and how we as a community are going to try to really support each other versus looking at it in terms of class, the way it's always been, really trying to help each other overall. So that's what I'm most looking forward to. Hopefully people really take this seriously and look for that change. And I know relationships is a difficult one because we're so social. We're used to going to brunches and partying. Not me necessarily. I don't do much of that anymore. But, just really those social aspects of getting out in groups is a huge part of our demographic. Truly everyone. But I think it's hit us really hard. And that's been the hardest shift for millennials taking this seriously, and Gen Z certainly. I'm not going to lump it all into millennials, but really pulling away from being used to just hanging out with a bunch of people, but really focus on coming together and being alone as needed, I think has been really hard for some.
Yeah. Jordan, were you going to say something?
I was nodding my head. I think it was a really good point. I do think it is, the whole idea of people connecting and just building your own networks. I think it's going to be huge. I think coming out of this, I think it's going to be this multi-generational threaded network of people that are really about the exchanging of ideas, hopefully for a common good. That I think will better the environment, better, our places and spaces that are out there.
Yeah.
And tech is the enabler in this case, right? It has to be.
Yeah. And it's the technology is actually allowing us to be more human. I think for many years we slammed technology for depriving us of humanity, but we're seeing through this pandemic moment that technology is allowing us to forge those connections, to check on one another, to embrace our community. And it really feels like there's been a humanity first, which is not going to be a surprise to you all or anybody listening in on this call, because design always puts humanity first. There's a quote, one of my favorite quotes about design from Jules Pfeiffer is, "Design is important because chaos is so hard." And this is clearly chaos that we are living through. Where do you see, and I don't want this to sound at all crass or opportunistic, but where do you see opportunities for design and designers through this period and post-pandemic? Because we are going to get through this. Where are there opportunities for design? Where will your clients be looking to you to help continue to make their lives better, healing better, learning better?
Maybe two quick thoughts. I think that there is going to be a new normal where this reliance on technology that we're all experiencing is going to cause an acceptance of experts and thought leaders joining sessions, irregardless of where they are in the world, because the virtual connectivity will just become an accepted norm. So, being able to bring experts to the table to make a design, a strategy so much better, it won't be an obstacle anymore. It'll be something that could just be very fluid. The other thing, and I think we're already seeing this, is clients asking us about, what does this mean for the hospitality industry? What does this mean for the residential industry? What does it mean for workplace design if people's take on density is different? Will micro housing, need to be re-examined because people don't want to have that small unit and rely on amenities, but then they may not be able to use as much? Will the workplace change because there'll be a greater need for different types of gathering spaces, as well as pull-aside spaces that respect people's privacy, respect people's ability to have some distance, and, in the hospitality industry, how do you build in flux? How do you build in the ability to recognize that there could be ebbs and flows of needs and demands?
Yeah, great points. Great points.
I think overall, for the industry, it's going to be a big focus on social justice. That's one of my personal passions of design, and looking at how do we design for the demographics that have typically gotten left behind. It's usually that kind of feel-good charity where you design for the homeless to, improve your sense of well-being sometimes. But I think we're seeing now that it's going to be really more important to put them first and to look at how do we help the less fortunate, because in a pandemic, we're all trying to come together. And I hope that that's what will come out of this, is really putting a focus on looking at the less fortunate in the community and our most vulnerable people.
Great point.
And right now we're helping a number of our healthcare clients really design interim facilities that can accommodate this surge in patients. But even as we look at those clients longer term, I think changing their perspective on inpatient versus outpatient care and the relationship between the two of those, but also just longer term, looking at the design of cities and how parks, I think, are always important to cities, but will become increasingly important, in public hand washing stations and more access to public restrooms that are of nice quality and serve the public. So I think that in so many ways, design is going, and probably in many ways we haven't even thought of yet, is going to be important to a transformation once we're through this.
Yeah. From an economic standpoint, it is almost inevitable that if we're not in a recession now, we will be. And we know what a recession does to our industry. Is there any advice from any of you about how we're going to navigate kind of what's ahead from an economic perspective? And I appreciate how difficult that question is, because I'm asking you to pull out your crystal ball, and I think the hallmark of what we've all been living through, we don't even know what tomorrow is going to bring. So I'm super asking you an unfair question. But how can we start to think about navigating what's coming at us next?
I think, Cheryl, one point is that you have to really proactively manage your business, and I think be transparent while doing so. I agree this is highly unpredictable in terms of how it's going to affect our profession and each of our businesses. And when we've seen some projects go on hold, we've seen other projects accelerate in terms of the demands that they've placed on it. So I think one thing we're talking a lot about is just flexibility of the staff, flexibility to do things that you might not be accustomed to doing. Maybe you are an interior designer and we're asking you to help out on signage and wayfinding plans, or just flexing with the need of the firm and being nimble and coming together. And as a management team, just watching it daily, really, to see how things are looking and trying to take care of our teams and our people.
Yeah.
I think that's a really good term, of the flexibility. I think we look at it as the ability to recognize talent across the globe and move work around to keep people activated, engaged, but always recognizing it's people first. It's a people first culture in our business for what all of us do. I think it's so important. The other thing I was going to say is there is a light at the end of the tunnel, I think, and it's like when I look, and I was talking to some of our China colleagues the other day on Monday, and they're starting to go back to work, and they're talking about their clients coming to them and saying, how do I make up for lost time? So I look at that as a bit of a bright spot that, if we, recognize that there are several months ahead of us, a couple months ahead of us, that they're seeing that the work opportunities are there, and recognizing that. And then for us, I think the other piece of this is just recognizing is where you are is where business happens. So that, whether you're in, sitting in Los Angeles, or you're sitting in Toronto, or you're sitting in London, or Charlotte, it doesn't matter. It's like you have opportunities that you can bring to the table, and you have creativity that we want to be able to harness for the collective good. Yeah.
Jordan, do you see more partnering happening between firms as a resle? I mean, that had already started to happen.
Yeah, it started to happen, and I think it's even more so. Actually, what I found really refreshing last week, I did a webinar to the consultant community, and was joined by some of our colleagues, and we had I think it was 680 consultants that we partner with on different projects. And after that, the outreach was amazing. It was about okay, all right, this is what we're doing on technology. This is what you're doing. How can we bring this together to serve our clients better? Yeah. And I see that with design firms too, being able to talk about, all right, there's an opportunity to do this. How do we do it differently? Recognizing that we are in a new way of working. And I do think to the common good, to the projects that are to the civic and social projects, how do we look at the kind of the opportunities where design attention is needed and partner together to recognize that the solutions may be richer and better by virtue of more minds at the table.
Yeah. Sue, for you and Joey, do you see any significant changes to your business model, or would you have any advice for smaller firms?
Thank you for asking, because that to me, when we look at, for Joey and myself, when we look at our firm, because we're a smaller office, we're less nimble in this climate. And we learned from 2008 that, to be prepared for a small firm in these times where there's this downturn, it takes really our whole group getting together. And in the past, we've, furloughed, we've implemented ways to try to keep everybody still engaged in whether it's part-time or, furlough time and things like that. But we want to keep our group together. And so we really rely on the community of smaller firms. So similar to what Jordan's saying, that we, reach out across, our firm friends and colleagues and other firms, and maybe partner up and try to look for opportunities within our city. Maybe we've not done a lot of housing before. And so looking at the need for the city, and especially in LA with a lot of the homeless, there are opportunities here that I think we need to maybe shift our gears and change our business models in times like this to say, how do we get through the next 6, 8, 12 months if the work that we're doing, which is a lot of workplace, isn't really moving along and keeping our people busy. Right. And so we're thinking about that. It's certainly, things that issues that we're talking about, and getting together and talking about it with other firms that are similar in size really helps to kind of come up with ways to reach out and find those opportunities.
Yeah. So again, connection and community will continue to win, and especially during this time. Thinking about the things that we've talked about as an industry and with clients, like hoteling and benching and co-working, that's all going to change, right? Proximity, how we are sited in an office as individuals, and it's not that adjustable height desks won't ever be important, but we're going to think about where we're sited in an office. How do you think those conversations are going to flow? Because people are going to be, I think now and forever, concerned about distance and social distancing, and real estate is going to be impacted, and how much within a real estate context, how much square footage we're going to be allowing for. How do you think those conversations are going to shift and change? Jordan, you mentioned density earlier. Some predictions from you all about how we're going to have to rethink proximity.
Well, I think it's definitely the points you make, Cheryl, are all valid and so important. And we have a client we're working with right now that I'm working with, that we're looking at their plans and the density that has been created for them, and doing just some measurements across the floor plan, seat to seat, to try to illustrate that we're getting 6 feet in the initial planning. And I think some emails have been floating through our community about, touchless security, and just thinking about the workplace and all of the technology tools, from AV to security systems to the actual work settings themselves, and how do you make them work in a climate where people's sensitivity is so heightened to this, and large meeting spaces and so on. So I think it's going to be a really important conversation, and I think we just have to begin to start thinking about creative ideas to address these kinds of concerns that our clients will definitely have.
Feels like this is a time to be thinking about the ramifications and the potential transformations, now almost as like the hypotheticals that can play themselves out, on different client projects, because the conversations are beginning, but they're definitely going to come out more. I think that we had a conversation the other day about just thinking about, what from an interior experience, what does it mean to have those communal gathering spaces in an office environment? The water cooler conversation may look very different after this episode, right? And this whole experience, and for meeting spaces, with such a ramp up of technology, how does those spaces become technology friendly in a way that bringing people in virtually feels even more like they're part of the conversation rather than an ancillary screen in a corner.
Right, right, right. Yeah, I think instead of water cooler conversations, Jordan, we're going to have hand sanitizer conversations.
There you go. Big vats of hand sanitizer, right?
Cheryl pump. And also I was thinking about public transportation. We all live in cities with public transportation, and people, again, with that idea of proximity, we're all going to think very differently about when we're ultimately able to get back out and get from point A to point B, how we do that. And I know that automobile manufacturers are even already thinking about car interiors, but I'm thinking about mass transit systems, CTA and Metra here in Chicago, and because that's packing people basically into sardine cans. And then you think about the airline industry, how aviation is going to be fundamentally shifted as well.
So I don't own a car, which is strange for Atlanta people to hear. I don't own a car here. So I take public transit pretty much everywhere, supplemented with Uber and Lyft. Yeah. And I also travel a lot. I try to get to one new country a year. That's been halted completely. I was planning so many trips there out the window. But I think for me, it's been a really big conversation in terms of me probably getting a car this year, because I'm kind of stuck right now. So normally I would just, to get anywhere, go maybe take the bus or hop in an Uber. And I don't feel safe enough to do any of that at the current moment in time. So I know a lot of people that have vehicles are driving up to the mountains or driving to go hike somewhere and just to get out. And I kind of don't have that opportunity. So it's been a really hard look at, well, if I had a car, it'd be great to go do that. And I can get one. It wasn't necessarily that I just couldn't get one. It was more looking at just being economical and taking public transit. Yeah. But it's really not safe because everyone has to touch the door. Everyone's sitting and changing seats. So even if you're 6 feet apart, the same person is not going to be in that same seat for the entire duration. So you never know who's been where. So we kind of have to look at, how do you properly sanitize public transit? I don't have the answer, but it's a difficult question.
Yeah.
I think it's definitely one of those public health issues where in Los Angeles, we're not as dense as, say, Chicago, New York. And we've been striving to get more density so that our public transits and systems become more efficient. And we haven't achieved that. And we've been relying on our cars way too long. And the problem here is that we can't continue to do that. And so how does a city like ours encourage, when we're, this whole time we've been trying to encourage more ridership, more public transit use, to now, having the stigma of, not wanting to get on the buses, the trains. And so I see a movement that towards maybe a little more, I don't want to say we're gonna walk around in hazmat suits, but I think there's gonna have to be some kind of ability for us to still be, somewhat a dense population in the city, because I'm actually saddened by the idea that we're not gonna gather in larger groups anymore, or at least there's this, for the immediate future, that's not going to happen. And after this, are we going to be able to come together for music concerts, for outdoor venues, and all those things that we love and enjoy? And so what does that all look like living in the city that has this kind of density?
That's such a great point, Sue. How will we ever feel safe and secure again about gathering? And what can design do to that day that we all eventually walk back into our offices, and we will, whatever that day will be? What's going to make us feel safe and secure about convening and gathering again?
I think support and, use the word love from our employers, and more flexibility really in the workplace in terms of hours that you might work, when you come in, optionality once you're in the workplace. I think an emphasis on cleanliness and you know, all the different things the CDC has recommended will become more of, I think, our daily lives. I also
Right.
think we'll see people wearing masks and gloves. You know, I know our colleagues in China do it much more frequently than we see here in the United States. And I
Yeah.
think we're going to begin to see that as a protocol for lots of travelers and possibly even colleagues at work if they're not feeling well or they, you know, are trying to be extra cautious. So I think we're just going to have to design in more, sounds crazy, but places to wash your hands, even, you know, maybe that aren't in the bathroom, right? You just need to wash your hands. You don't necessarily need to run into the restroom. It's
Right.
those kinds of tools. And so it's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's a great point. I think it's going to also create tremendous opportunities for design, but also design collaborations with material manufacturers and vendors to think differently about the products that are on the marketplace, you know, to think about what happens, you know, can I really truly make some products that are coming to market that beyond being resilient products, that they're climate wellness. It's all about, you know, both the resilient functions that we've been talking about pre-COVID-19 on, you know, environmental action and having a mission and a focus towards a better environment, but at the same time, also being sensitive to everything we just experienced. Can you find new products? Can we create and collaborate to develop new products that are out there that create these conditions that are, in a sense, you know, truly safer, better, and recognize that there's a heightened sensitivity in the public?
Yeah, that's such a great point, Jordan. And I know we've got manufacturers who are who've dialed in and are on this call. You know, for us as human beings, proximity is important, and comfort's important, and simplicity and mobility, but tactility is important. Like right now, I want to touch my face, but tactility is important to us as human beings. And so, from a material standpoint, we're all still going to want to touch the things around us, but we want to feel safe doing that. And I think, you know, that's going to need to be high on the top of the list for manufacturers to understand that human beings require touch. We need to touch one another, and we need to touch the world around us.
And I was thinking about that in terms of just my desk at work. I have a lot of, I collect elephants, so I have my little elephant collection on my desk. And just thinking of all the parts and pieces and surfaces that exist in my workstation alone, I'm really gonna, when I go back, clear out everything, wipe everything down. But looking at the design of everything in the future, getting towards what those futuristic movies look like, where you have sleek everything and seamless connections, so there's not a lot of opportunities for bacteria to harbor. That's what I've been thinking of a lot in terms of how we're probably going to end up looking a lot like the video games I play in terms of the future of design, and everything's a cleanable surface because it's now on our minds like, oh, well, I touched that, what's on it? Whereas before we were only thinking of maybe the bathroom handle or some public transportation, the bus handle. We're thinking of everything now as a surface that harbors bacteria, and how will that change the design aesthetic of tables and chairs and everything?
You know, Tara, I think you make a really interesting point in the sense that as you look at what clients desire going forward, are they going to desire an aesthetic, right, that communicates those kinds of solutions? As we look at, you know, experience in an environment, whether it be hospitality, workplace, whatever, healthcare. I mean, just the feeling when you walk in that I'm in a clean place. I'm in a place that's comfortable. I'm in a place that's safe. And just communicating that through design, I think, is going to be very important.
It might be a little bit of a boomerang back to the slickness of design in the 90s, where everything was seamless and, you know, non-material, right?
Yeah. Do you guys think, thinking about climate change, which of course we were talking about that, you know, prior to this, do we think work from home might be a new strategy to combat climate change?
It's amazing to see when you see those before and after photos of aerial, like satellite views of different areas that had heavy density, heavy manufacturing, you know, pre and now, and realizing what's happening right now, which work from home and lack of movement is causing and frankly, change to the supply chain is causing, this transformation in the environment in a beneficial way. I hope, and I do believe that there'll be a lot of learnings from this, where people will recognize that striking a balance between, being together in a space to physically, share ideas versus virtually, that both can work, but being able to appreciate the fact that virtual does work, and can add value, I think will be really important. I think the other piece of things, just what we were talking about materials, I think it'll be really interesting to think about, how spaces can potentially be repurposed, reused in different ways, rather than thinking about, do we have to create new every time? And it may cause a whole different dialogue. I hope it does, that really is causing us to think differently about our urban environments, to really work with, what we're learning now. Work from home, may also be that I could go to, my work from home and your work from home could actually be, once we start to be able to get outside our homes, that radius could expand a little bit, and those spaces around that could also be part of that work from home mode.
Yeah, I think this experience has, my generation, there are still people out there that are resistant to embracing this, right? As a leader, I need to see my people. I mean, they're still out there. I need to see my people in the office to make sure they're in fact getting their work done. And I think that this experience has certainly proven that that is not necessary, right? And it's important to come together, but we've all been pretty productive, all things considered, in this situation. So I think acceptance at a much broader level is going to be certainly in our future.
I'm looking forward to seeing the studies that come from this in terms of the impact on the environment from this period that we've been working at home. I know some of the things we've been seeing some of them are hoaxes in terms of dolphins coming back and whatever, but in terms of long-term impact, I think it really is going to make a positive impact on the environment and prove some of those people that are naysayers wrong, that we do really impact the environment a great more deal than they previously thought, and getting them to be fully on board, especially the major decision makers and leadership positions, to really rally behind things we can do to change our lives to impact the environment for the better moving forward.
That's excellent. One last, and we're very close to wrapping up, but one last question for all of the working parents out there who are juggling now all of a sudden homeschooling, in addition to managing Zoom calls and conference calls. That affects all of us. That affects you all as firm leaders, possibly rethinking from an HR standpoint, offering support and services that help working parents. And what we know about this pandemic is, sadly, it's not a one-time only. In all likelihood, it might be seasonal, like the flu. And so we may have to prepare for a COVID moment, every year, every other year. And have you all started thinking about talking to your HR professionals about support that can be available for your employees? And not just parents, it's everybody, but we are really thinking differently about family and work now as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a huge point, and a very important point of just, we've been, Perkins+Will, really affording people flexibility in how they structure their day, their work hours, the amount of time that they're working, in accordance with what they can do with their families and for the firm. We have a lot of folks that have spouses or significant others that are on the front lines of healthcare, other services that are needed right now, and they also have kids at home. And so how do you make that all happen? So I think, again, back to this word flexibility, the firm affording folks the most flexibility we can to meet the demands of their job and their families, which family first, right?
Yeah, family first, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yes, I would just add it. At Gensler, we've really had a flex work environment before. I think this is also showing us that that flex actually can truly be extended, all the way through the week in a way that we probably, that's probably deeper than we had even thought. And, I have kids sitting in the other room right now, doing, probably should be doing school. I find that it is causing us to recognize in a really positive way that, allowing people to structure their days where they're then able to find the pockets of time that they feel they can best contribute, that you're going to get the best out of them when they're able to focus, and recognizing that has a flow, an ebb and flow that has to balance their work life, and that has to all be factored in. I think that's an important learning, I think, for all, quite frankly, for all of us, coming from this pandemic.
Yeah. So we are almost at the end of our time, and I just want to leave all of our 997 participants with some closing thoughts from each of you. And you know what, Tara, I'm going to put you on the headlights here for your closing thoughts about work, about life, about surviving, about thriving.
I think for me, it's just been causing me to take a look at my privilege in terms of all the things that I have, because I haven't been impacted a great deal. I still have, my salary job with benefits. I'm able to work from home. I have my laptop. So my life hasn't been greatly impacted, but just seeing the stories coming from everywhere and everyone has caused me to look outside of myself and see what I can do as a designer, as a human, to help other people who are not in my similar position. Granted, I've had that kind of thought process before this, but it's really forced me to really sit with it and think about just how I'm benefiting from the position that I'm in.
Yeah, perfect. Sue?
The closing thoughts, I think more than ever, I feel that we have a responsibility as designers and architects in going forward in the spaces that we are thinking about. And I'm thinking about, all the great questions that you guys have asked today is, what are we going to be doing? And I'm challenged by that notion. And I do think that, designing for our well-being and all the things that we were striving to do as a community, sustainability initiatives, all those things are going to become much more, hopefully, have a spotlight on them. And for us, I think going forward, I want to stay positive and think about the things that could really, what we do that can really lift us out of, the state we're in.
Yeah, thanks, Sue. Gina?
Yeah, I'll just say I was sent a video by a music students at Berkeley in Boston, and it is a fantastic video of the song "What the World Needs Now Is Love, Sweet Love," and it's if you can Google it and watch it, it's fantastic. Which they've all done from obviously remote locations and come together. And I think, I think that's kind of echo Sue's points. I think it's a hopeful time in many ways, and coming together of people and trying to be optimistic and extending love, kind of to Tara's point, and understanding that when you have fortune and privilege, in your life, just to give it back and give it to other people. And I think design is a powerful tool to do that.
Absolutely. And Jordan?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me. I feel like we will get through this. And I feel like that as an industry, we'll come out stronger. We're going to realize that we've all kind of learned to flex muscles in ways that we probably didn't know we could. And I think we will be, stronger as a profession, because of this. And, if there's one thing I learned in, from the 08-09 crisis, which was, just being open and transparent with colleagues and partners in the industry, to be able to just connect and communicate. And I think that if we do that, I think everyone has a role. I think we'll be okay.
Yeah. Well, on behalf of IIDA, I want to thank each of you for allowing us into your homes and for participating on the call today. And then to all of the participants, thank you all. Everybody stay safe, stay healthy, stay well, and we'll all see each other really, really soon. Design always wins. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Everybody.
Bye.